Welcome to the Business Radio Network. Enjoy Small Biz, Big Voices with Stephanie Rising.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Rising, a business coach and author in beautiful Tucson, Arizona. Today, it's my pleasure to speak with Clint Parry, Business Development Manager for Focus HR. Our interview will conclude with a Proust lightning round, and our final segment will be Dear Coach, when I'll coach listeners through issues they've emailed in. For the time being, we are recording our show remotely, so thank you for bearing with any sound idiosyncrasies. It's my pleasure to welcome my guest, Clint Parry. Clint has a passion for business growth and personal development. At Focus HR, he helps small business owners accelerate their growth with HR outsourcing. Clint began his career at Xerox Corporation, helping to grow Xerox's document outsourcing practice in Tucson by over $4 million in revenue. Thereafter, he launched his own coaching firm, Action Coach, where he coached over 300 business owners in Southern Arizona. Most recently, Clint led strategy and client development for Lapin International, a strategy and leadership consulting firm focused on building purpose-driven companies and leaders. Clint is a past columnist for Inside Tucson Business and the Arizona Daily Star, and he is one of Tucson's 40 under 40. He earned a degree in business management from BYU, an MBA from the University of Arizona, and is a SHRM Senior Certified Professional. Clint, thank you so much for taking time to be with us today. Welcome to the show, and I'm just really eager to ask a whole bunch of questions about what's going down these days.
Thank you. I'm so excited to join you on the show today. Thanks for the invitation.
Well, I appreciate it. And I wanted to kick things off with a statistic that I came across that was very surprising to me. I know that Arizona has a lot of small businesses, and Tucson in particular, but I saw in a 2018 SBA survey that 99.4% of Arizona companies were classified as small businesses employing a total of 1 million people. And I know that obviously COVID has had an impact on many businesses of all sizes, but thankfully we still have a lot of small businesses that are alive and well. And I think what's always been a challenge for us as small business owners is finding the time and the resources to effectively juggle all of our obligations. With HR specifically, what's the challenge that you see small business owners most frequently run into, and what can they do to alleviate that burden?
Well, it's a great question, Stephanie. And I think most often what I notice in small business world, at least as it pertains to HR, is most business owners just simply lack a good HR strategy and a good HR infrastructure.
Yeah.
And many may go, what is that exactly? Well, essentially, at its simplest forms, a good HR strategy is, how do we best manage the employer-employee relationship? What are the strategies we employ to do that, to ensure that we can attract and retain the best talent? And then, do we have a good infrastructure, a good systems, foundation, technology systems to support that HR strategy?
That's great. I'm taking notes. I take notes with all, I learned so much from every guest. And something that you just mentioned, the systems and the technology. I think a lot of business owners are very sensitive about wanting to be competitive and attracting good employees and retaining them. But then they forget kind of the unsexy back office aspect of that, which is the protocols and the technology that help people to orient and acclimate so they feel like they're successful.
Right. And so ultimately it's, when you bring somebody in to your company, first impressions matter, and how you onboard them, and what does that system, or what does that approach look like? What does that process look like? And it really, another way to look at it is, what you think about the employee life cycle, from the time that an employee is recruited into the business, they join the business, and then they go through onboarding, getting them sort of acclimated to your business and the culture and the way you do things. to ultimately how you develop and train them and how you engage them and retain them long term. Ultimately how you recognize and advance them through the business and then through ultimately separation, whether they retire or they separate and move on to a different career. But through that entire life cycle, you have to have a strategy around that. And how do we, in each of those steps of that cycle, and also an infrastructure, systems and technology and good people to support that. Or things are going to be fairly fragmented and it's going to be reactive versus sort of proactive. And it's not going to run well, and it's not going to ultimately create the kind of environment, the kind of business that employees are going to enjoy and thrive in and want to work for, because things are going to seem sort of hodgepodge and disorganized and reactive. And it's going to ultimately, the other real big issue is exposing your business to risk. If you don't have good systems, if you don't have around compliance and really understand the labor laws and how they apply to your business, and are doing things right as it comes, at least as it pertains to HR, you really are opening yourself up to some risk that's not good.
And I think the irony of that also, and you and I have discussed this, we are also small business owners. We help other small business owners. We're all control freaks. It is really difficult. I know, it's shocking news. It's so difficult to start a company, and it's such an extension of who you are, the brand that you've created. And I think all of us struggle with letting go. And so then our default is the DIY in all aspects of our business, including HR. But like what you were saying, the irony with that is keeping it all to ourselves and trying to control it ourselves probably indirectly opens ourselves up to risk, because most of us are not HR experts. So what are the indicators that it's time to look at a different solution like HR outsourcing, and what are the real benefits or the implications to a business owner for choosing to outsource their HR?
So business owners, and you know this very well as a coach, Stephanie, that ultimately they have a lot of plates they're spinning.
Yeah.
And trying to keep all those spinning, and if you're, again, control freaks, like we were talking about, you tend to add more without, ending one or two of those plates spinning. It just can be too overwhelming and ultimately get them in trouble. And so, I heard a great advice from a former CEO I used to work for. And he said, do what you do best all of the time, and do what you don't do best none of the time. And I think that's such great wisdom. And when you think about, okay, what am I really good at? What am I passionate about? What should I be doing all the time? Well, when it comes down to business, small business and big business, really, you as an owner, executive, your real keys are, how do I attract and keep the best talent? Because ultimately that's going to differentiate my business. And how do I attract and keep the best customers? Anything sort of outside of that, should you really be spending your time, your precious time that you only have so much of in a day, doing things like HR or other things, technology or accounting or whatever other things that you may be taking onto your plate that you simply just don't have the time or the knowledge or the expertise to be doing. So if you look at sort of that trigger point or indicators, I think something happens when a business sort of gets over that 10 employee mark. Usually it's somewhat manageable and they can handle sort of the quote HR issues, but I've had so many discussions, and it seems like more often than not, business owners have noted when they sort of trip over that 10 employee mark, start growing, things get a lot more unwieldy. So you really, as a business owner, have to take a serious step back and look at your time. Where are you spending it, and how much of HR, transactional, administrative HR things are soaking it up, or how much of it is soaking up the time of an office manager or bookkeeper when they could be doing budgeting, forecasting, planning, analysis, things that ultimately are going to help you make better business decisions and contribute a lot more to the bottom line. So those are absolute sort of things to really be thinking about as you think about what's, versus the sort of do-it-yourself mentality. I can just handle these things on my own.
Yeah, and I know, I'm sympathetic to business owners who, they're working with a finite amount of resources, and they think if they do certain things themselves that they're going to somehow save themselves money. But to the point that you just made, what they don't always take into consideration are opportunity costs, where if they stopped doing something that really fell outside of their purview, and if it falls outside of your skill set, it's taking you longer, right? So you're spending more time doing something that you're not as good at. Whereas if you devoted that same amount of time to growing your business and engaging in revenue generating activities, you probably wind up more than paying for outsourcing.
Exactly it, Stephanie, exactly. Because ultimately they say, well, how much is, what's this going to, cost me, this kind of thing? It's going to cost me a lot. And I said, I always say to them, exactly, what is it going to cost you? What is it going to cost you in terms of lost revenue, in terms of growth to your business, in terms of potential customers that might actually, or cost in terms of losing out on potentially good talent? The cost, the real cost, the big cost, if you look at those big things, far outweigh any, I'd say, minuscule amount of money you're going to save doing these kinds of things yourself.
And one of the reasons I'm so happy to have you on the show is because I think HR has this really unfortunate reputation of being a necessary evil instead of a real asset to a business. And one thing that comes to my mind is the fact that diversity and inclusion in the workplace adds so much to a company in terms of productivity, profitability, customer loyalty, the quality of decisions that are made. But somebody has got to manage all of that talent. And with diversity and with an inclusive workplace come a lot of different points of view, the need for people to feel accepted by their peers, the need for people to feel like they have a voice in decisions. That's more of an art than a science, and somebody's got to have their hands on the reins. So how would you view an HR director's role in promoting and managing the kind of culture that brings a wealth of knowledge and a wealth of profit to a business?
So it's a great question. In fact, I really, a lot of my past 10 years before my time at Focus HR was spent in leadership and strategy and doing a lot of work actually in executive development around. We had much of our practice was actually focused on cross-cultural intelligence, diversity, inclusion, kinds of related types of work, and then mainly in the larger Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 kinds of businesses. But certainly it's as critical or as important for small businesses as it is for large companies today. I think one of the things I noticed that's interesting when it comes to diversity and inclusion and its role in business is that it really starts with the business owner, starts with the CEO, starts with management executive team. They simply can't leave it to the HR director. They certainly can't abdicate it.
Right.
And they can certainly delegate certain key things, but an HR director is pivotal in the role, and they're pivotal in terms of being, certainly a great cheerleader, a coach, an advocate, a promoter. But when it comes to those core D&I values, they have to, it kind of starts from the top, and they've got to be sort of decided on and integrated and committed to the fabric of the business, the fabric of the culture, and actively lived and embodied each day. And it can't just be saying, oh, well, our HR director is going to take care of that. No, it really starts from leadership. And then ultimately a great HR director is going to be key and instrumental in amplifying that in the business, in not only through the people side of the business and talent, and of course when it comes to promoting those kind of values and philosophy to those who they are recruiting, bringing into the business, but then and certainly to the existing employees, ensuring that those values are promulgated and promoted importantly. So, and it can't just be, here's the other thing I noticed about sort of like diversity, inclusion, or other kinds of things, employee engagement, whatever you name it is, and you give it, but ultimately we noticed many times in business, it would become more of a internal, say, marketing promotion or campaign, and it almost landed as something very superficial. But you know what? People, employees, customers, suppliers, they pick up on this stuff. They'll see through that sort of something that's not really authentic to the culture of the business and to the values of the business. So I think that's another important role that an HR director plays, working with the leadership of the business, is ensuring that this is something that really matters to us, that we care about, that's sincere and genuine, and not just a me too kind of afterthought that we're just saying, oh yeah, we believe in diversity and inclusion, but you really don't live it. You really don't buy into what that means, and you don't actively integrate it into day-to-day business.
So the HR director is kind of the living, breathing embodiment of something that's put into practice. Like this is more about action. This is less about just language.
Correct.
Okay. Now, for small businesses who have fewer than 10 employees, maybe they just have a handful of people working for them. HR does tend to fall under the purview of the lead accountant. And a lot of them actually do a great job keeping their employers in compliance. And yet at the same time, HR covers a lot of very nuanced territory. So what's something that you wish every organization better understood or implemented when it comes to their HR?
That it is a huge challenge, actually, Stephanie, especially because we do have a lot of micro businesses that out there that under the sort of 10 employee mark.
Yeah.
And when you say nuance, you're right. There are HR, human resources, in the broad practice, the discipline of HR, especially when it comes to labor laws, this is changing. It's changing rapidly every year. I mean, case in point, look what we've just gone through in the last few months.
Yeah.
I mean, the institution of new regulations, laws, and all associated with their PPP loans. I mean, it has been an incredibly difficult, challenging thing to try to navigate, and that's left small business owners like scratching their heads and trying to figure it out. A little challenging some for us as it's, have really experts in the field and trying to help our clients really navigate it. But I think, as I think about these small business owners, what's something that they really better understood? For me, I just wish they really understood that it can be an actual business strategy, and perhaps even the most important strategy, not just sort of an afterthought. It's not HR shouldn't be something that's transactional or just administrative, and certainly worry about it being advocated or delegated to something accountant or bookkeeping kind of role. Talent is the key differentiator in business, right? Anybody can imitate or replicate technology or products or services, but leadership caliber, talent caliber, you can't replicate. That is your key differentiator in business. It should be the business owner, CEO's number one priority: getting and keeping good talent. So even in a startup mode, that should be something that's important, and in thinking through the future of the business, a key part of their strategy is, okay, how are we going to handle human resources? What is our strategy going to be? What kind of infrastructure are we going to be building here, so that we can scale and grow, and we can do this right, and it not be sort of this thing that evolves into something that's sort of fragmented and reactive and ultimately exposes us to a lot of risk.
And that's a really good point. And I wrote down that it is a key differentiator. And as you were mentioning that, it made me think back to earlier in our conversation about when we're in DIY mode and we're keeping everything to ourselves, kind of the equal and opposite reaction that business owners will have is they just won't pay attention to anything at all, or they shunt it off onto somebody's plate and they're just so relieved that somebody else is quote unquote dealing with it and they don't have to anymore. They don't really take the time to plan, to transition, to communicate. And HR is just far too critical to, for lack of a more delicate phrase, to half-ass it. It's probably where you have your greatest amount of risk, and it's also probably where you can derive, as you said, the majority of your reward. I know that there's kind of the old traditional percentages. You have to spend like 20% of your time on marketing every week, at least 20%, always engaging with your customers or networking or something that's going to expand your reach, your relationships. How much time do you think every week these smaller business owners that are forced out of necessity to take a more DIY approach, how much time should they be spending every week focusing on developing and implementing their HR strategy?
Well, ultimately, if talent is the key differentiator in business, if you agree to that premise and that sort of statement, then, to me, it's a significant majority. It's, perhaps, 50, 60% of your time should be really focused at least on what are we doing to attract and retain and develop the best people in our business. And ultimately, if we're going to grow, you go ask any business owner out there. I mean, I have conversations all the time. It is the number one issue. It is the number one pain, headache. I just can't find and keep good people.
Yeah.
And it's tough out there. And even in the current situation we find ourselves in, I mean, we've had record low unemployment, and Tucson has struggled to have an inventory, sufficient kind of inventory for good talent, especially those in a more of a managerial or executive kinds of very highly skilled types of talent. It's very difficult, and it keeps feels almost, I think a lot of business owners feel it's almost like a full-time job just to try to find and keep good people for the business. So it has to be a significant portion of your business. And maybe sounds crazy, but honestly, it is the key. To me, it's the key differentiator.
We're going to take just a quick break on that note. This is Small Biz, Big Voices, hosted by Stephanie Rising. I'm a small business coach on a mission to get business owners off their hamster wheel and empower them as authentic and influential leaders. My online dynamic marketing course provides step-by-step videos and exercises to help you connect with your ideal client and discover your true sales personality. Find out if you're a panther, politician, protector, or professor by going to therisingeffect.com. Today, I'm visiting with Clint Parry of Focus HR. Now, you mentioned the impact of COVID a little bit earlier, and I think, regardless of whether we've had to pivot our business to a virtual platform or whether we're still at least partially functioning in person, all businesses of all types are still, at the end of the day, composed of people. And those people are looking for opportunity and a sense of purpose. And they also come with their own complexity and a need to be heard. So for those who are brave enough to become HR directors, what advice would you give someone thinking about a career in HR? What can they expect, particularly in today's marketplace?
Well, number one, they better get ready for a wild roller coaster ride, because they can expect a lot of change and fast. And, it's amazing to me, just being in the field, and again, where we do this 24/7, what it takes for us as a full-time, staff of several HR managers and those that are in the field and benefits and payroll or workers' compensation, just to keep up with what is going on in the market and keep up with the current pace, the regulatory burden, the regulatory changes, and different labor laws and other sorts of things that are happening. So they've got to be prepared and interested and motivated and excited about change, because that's the name of the game here in HR. I think also there's a very big push in the HR industry for, HR and traditionally it's had a bad rap in the sense of being known as sort of handling a lot of administrative, tactical types of things, just being paper pushers and doing a lot of those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And there is a big push certainly from SHRM, the association that represents HR practitioners and others, to elevate the role of HR to a more strategic role. So I think somebody that's interested in looking at HR, a career in HR, they've got to say, am I somebody that's strategic, or am I more sort of tactical, administrative? What do I enjoy? What am I passionate about? And what am I capable of doing? What are my skills and interests in that area? And looking at SHRM, or an HRCI designation as another professional designation, I think is important. Certainly doing an internship, just getting some, real life experiences is something I really want to do. I can see myself doing for the next 10, 20, 30 years. But man, if the good ones, and they're hard to find, the great HR practitioners, if you can find one, they're worth their weight in gold. They're exceptional, but they're just very, very difficult to find, especially we've noticed in some of the smaller markets.
And it is, like we were saying before, I think anytime your job revolves around people rather than just straight administrative tasks, it is more art than science. And yet HR, it's almost like you have to have a little bit of a split personality, that you're dealing with things that are highly variable, sometimes volatile, and at the same time, you are responsible for upholding compliance and things that are very objective and regulatory. And so I can see from an HR director's point of view that is a little bit of a high wire act.
It is. It's not just birthday parties and office parties and feel good, employee engagement programs. It's a whole different ballgame. The good HR practitioner has a lot on the line. I mean, they are ultimately trying to mitigate risk for the business. They're trying to elevate its strategic positioning in the market, help it compete most effectively for the war on talent, which is definitely a war out there. And how are they helping that business to win that war, attracting, retaining the best talent? And ultimately, what are they doing to develop the good people they have? How are they helping create a great career path, and helping promote and recognize and advance people in the business? Because you add this whole, and then you add the whole mix of millennials and Gen Zers that are coming into the market and bring a whole different challenge, shall we say, to the talent game. And HR managers are tasked to figure that out. So,
and in that role, particularly, I mean, I've mentioned on prior shows, I mean, with millennials now being the largest living workforce, and some of them are now well into their 30s, and they've got a lot more experience under their belt, but there's kind of the younger end of the millennial spectrum, and now Gen Zers starting to come into like the entry-level workforce. One of the ways in which I view human resource work, I think that people who gravitate toward it are often naturally really good mentors. And like the younger workforce can really benefit from true mentorship, not being, patronized or dismissed or, like patted on the head, but like true cultivation, true mentorship. And I know I've learned a lot over the years from HR experts such as yourself, who have given me a lot of insight into some very complex situations that have been fraught with possible risk. So it makes me curious, who has been an influence to you in your life or in your work where HR is concerned? What did you learn from them?
Well, certainly I've learned from some great, at least in my role, I've learned from some great clients that have been in the HR business, because at least in my previous role, most of my previous career, most of our clients were chief HR officers of large corporations and or heads of talent management, talent development, um, and gosh, I dealt with dozens and dozens of them over the 10 years I was at least in that particular career. And I can think of, just really sort of, I don't know, a couple handfuls maybe of those, and maybe even a handful of those that were really the good ones that I thought were so, I think balanced maybe is the right word, but balanced in how they approached human resources, where they were strategic, and they were thoughtful. They really had that sort of business brain. They really thought first, okay, what's really most important to the business, and what are our business objectives, and what is this going to be aligned? We always talk about HR alignment, right? HR alignment to the business. Is this aligned or not? What we're trying to do, is this going to move the needle on our performance or not? It wasn't about sort of their own program or their own personal sort of goals or aspirations or what they wanted HR to be. It was really they were really elevated above that and more looking at overall the business objectives and goals, and making sure they were aligned, their teams were aligned, any HR initiative, program, whatever it is, policy, was aligned to the business objective. So that to me was really, really impressive. And there was again, probably a good handful of HR leaders that to me embodied that. They were also just really good to get along with, to talk with. They weren't reactive. They weren't over dramatic. They were just pragmatic. They were, of course, very personable, and just got along well with other leaders. They had a way to just ebb and flow. They could adjust their behavioral style, their communication style to a wide variety of different business leaders and line leaders, functional leaders in the business that they had to work with, and be able to listen, being that capacity to listen, to understand, to test for understanding, and then to align to those leaders and what their needs were, and to deliver on what those needs were. That's a rare quality. And I think that also distinguished those HR leaders that I dealt with in the past.
And since you had a chance to witness that level of professionalism, I'm assuming those folks worked for larger companies, and I'm tying this back to the comment that you made earlier, that there's like this war for talent, that everyone, whether it's a large company or small company, everyone is looking to get the best possible team assembled that they can. And so it sounds like larger companies who have these very talented HR directors that not only recruit but retain top talent, how can small businesses compete with that?
Well, it's tough, especially perhaps in a market like ours, where there's already seems like a low inventory of really top talent, because we see it in many cases fleeting to Phoenix or other larger metropolitan areas where they feel like there's more opportunity and a lot more companies, more career opportunities. But I think honestly the only way that small businesses can compete with the larger companies here, who have more resources, many times it seems like better benefits or better brand name recognition. They've got to liberate themselves from anything that's low value, that's administrative, that's really pulling them away from this number one priority of finding and keeping good talent. They've got to employ every strategy to find and keep them. But then, one of the strategies they can look at, I think is very effective, is like HR outsourcing, because ultimately you're gaining advantage, you're leveraging an HR outsourcing business that has the scale and size of a lot of small companies, hundreds of small companies aggregated together, that acts like, has the buying power and the resources of large company. So if you can aggregate your small business to a lot of other small companies, hundreds of other small companies, that's going to gain you some leverage, some buying power, and some ability and infrastructure and a strategy at really sort of the fraction of cost of certainly doing yourself. That's going to allow you to compete in a much more effective way with the larger companies going after that talent. So if you can offload, liberate yourself of all to like an HR outsourcing firm, like a Focus HR, ultimately then I can then take that time and focus on my business. I can focus on getting and keeping best talent, because now I have access to some of those things that the big companies do that I didn't have before. So it really, in a sense, levels the playing field a lot. And I think that's very significant. I also think another thing they can do to compete with the larger companies is really establishing a purpose-driven business. Especially millennials, Gen Zers, they want to make a difference, right? They want to feel like they're part of something big. They're looking for this sense of meaning, a sense of contribution, to be part of something. So what does your business stand for? What's your purpose? Why do you exist? What's the contribution you make to the world, to your customers, that no one else does in quite the same way? And how do you infuse that into your recruiting efforts and into your retention efforts? I think that's significant as well. And you're competing with the larger companies, and you can inspire a potential candidate to be part of something, a growth opportunity, something that's exciting and something that's meaningful, is going to make a real positive difference in the world. That could be your edge.
This is the perfect segue to the last question I wanted to ask in this part of our conversation. When you were mentioning outsourcing to a company like yours that has this aggregate buying power, Focus HR serves clients in 33 states. And so chances are someone listening to this podcast has access to your expertise. What does Focus HR offer to business owners who are looking to either streamline their compliance or really up their strategic HR game? When you say you have aggregate buying power, what does that mean to the end user?
Well, first and foremost, certainly, and I kind of referred to this before, we give you an HR strategy and an infrastructure. It's already built, it's designed. It's sort of like a plug and play in a sense. You don't have to build it yourself, figure this out yourself. We've already invested lots of money and time and hired the best people to figure all that out.
You've made the wheel.
We made the wheel. Don't reinvent it. Don't create it. Invent it yourself. You got a team of experts here. You've got the technology, the platform. You've got best practices, and so all that tied up really in a variable cost kind of pay structure, where you don't have to invest all the fixed costs and other variable costs to develop something like that or keep something going like that. I think also, ultimately, if they're really looking to up their HR game, they need to spend, again, more time focused on the activity, the time of finding and seeking good people for their business and keeping those people, and less time on managing them and handling all the administrative things that go along with that. The other sort of aspect around sort of the leverage or the aggregation is just an example of workers' compensation or employee benefits. When you're leveraging hundreds of companies and you have thousands of worksite employees that are aggregate as part of those hundreds of companies that are clients, you are leveraging that from a buying perspective. So ultimately, that's going to translate into lower costs and certainly a better situation, better scenario, better health plans, or a better workers' compensation policy for your business.
a much better outcome with far less investment of the owner's time, which sounds like a win-win to me.
Yeah, less time, a better team, and ultimately better technology.
You can learn more about Clint and Focus HR by visiting their website at www.focushr.net. We will also have that for you in today's show notes. We are going to go on to the Proust lightning round. Are you ready?
I'm ready. Let me have it.
All right. The Proust questionnaire was a parlor game made popular by the French essayist and novelist Marcel Proust. He believed that by answering 35 specific questions, an individual reveals their true nature. I'm going to ask you 5 of them. And the first is, which historical figure do you most identify with?
Oh, gosh. Well, you know, I'm a person of faith, and so as I think about going back to historical figures, we'll go to a biblical figure. So how about, like, I love Joseph of Egypt. Guys just went through so much, and even through all the adversity and the challenges, he rose to be somebody great that actually made a huge impact in saving Egypt from famine. And I'm always impressed with that story.
Very cool. What is your most treasured possession?
Oh, wow. I think my faith, honestly. I know it's not a sort of a physical, tangible possession, but it's something that is very dear to me and something that is an anchor for me in my life, and that I treasure greatly. And it's what brings me joy and peace and happiness.
What is the quality you most like in a person?
For me, it's kind of a couple of things. I think empathy is one, where somebody can really empathize, they can listen and show they care. And the other thing I really like is spontaneous and somebody that's fun.
What is your greatest extravagance?
Probably Reese's peanut butter cups. Yeah, I'm a little bit of a Reese's fan, but if I can get out, play a game of golf, which I love and rarely do, I always find an excuse. I'm too busy and etc. That's probably my greatest extravagance, sadly enough.
Extravagance and frustration.
Yes.
And lastly, what is your idea of perfect happiness?
Whoa, perfect happiness. To me, it goes back, I think, just to balance. We've got so much that's going on in our life, but if you can find balance in the areas of those sort of like the Covey areas, physical, spiritual, emotional, social, intellectual, mental, those capacities, if you can have balance in each of those areas, I think life is pretty good. And I've got, and I've also got, 4 kids. So seeing them being productive and just, the people that you love and care about that are happy and healthy, all that in a balanced sort of life, to me, that's sort of perfect happiness.
That's awesome. Thank you. I love getting honest, spontaneous answers to these. You have great answers. Thank you, Clint. Next, we're going to have Dear Coach. I would love to have you chime in. This is the end of our last, at the end of our last segment. Dear Coach gives our listeners the chance to have their emailed questions addressed. And many of the problems that I see in businesses, if not relationships in general, stem from either a misunderstanding of others or a focus on our challenges rather than our strengths. So I'm doing a 4-part Dear Coach series on the DISC behavioral types to help us better recognize our own motivation as well as that of others. And today I'm featuring the I, who is the influencer. With a need to pepper most tasks with fun, their path toward a goal may not always be a straight line, but it will definitely be an experience. Influencers are the world's optimists. They are guided largely by their emotions and the belief that almost anything is possible. They just need to find a way. They also thrive when accepted. A smile paired with thank you or good job will win you great loyalty from someone who's genuinely eager to be appreciated. That need for social acceptance is both a driving force and an Achilles heel of the I style. Their need to connect and communicate, their charming persuasiveness, and their natural ability to befriend others make them highly productive in people-oriented industries. However, I's need to beware that their eagerness to please and their emotionalism can sometimes fog their objectivity and cause them to attach themselves to ideas or people before all the facts are in. Each of the disc styles has a specific emotional motivator that tends to guide their decision making. Sensitive as they are, it's fortunate for I's that they are motivated by optimism. They rebound quickly in their confidence that tomorrow is indeed another day. Similarly to the D style, I's like to keep things moving along without getting bogged down in too many details. However, where the D is driving for results, the I is seeking out fun and friendship. In work or play, I's must enjoy what they do and who they interact with, or they quickly become bored. Their near constant need for variety can be difficult to fill, as well as make them prone to flit from idea to idea. These are our sprinters, not our marathoners. It's that combination of few details, much hopefulness, and easy distraction that can cause others to view high I's as Pollyannas. I's can lack the concrete facts that typically root solid decisions, trusting instead their own feelings. A talkative and emotional group, I's sometimes get off task and share more information than others can comfortably hear. But I's who master their gift of the gab and adapt to the listener's style are highly effective at connecting with and influencing others. Think of Oprah. There is a reason why she taped her show for 24 years in front of a live audience. I's feed on the energy in the room. For someone as dynamic and influential as Oprah, that sense of immediacy and connection is simply essential to her being. In business, gregarious influencers generate enthusiasm for ideas and excel at motivating their team. Their personableness makes them excellent for business development, as they tend to be top revenue producers. What others may perceive as a lack of a solid plan is an influencer's ability to view life as an organic, ongoing process. If they attempt something and it doesn't work out, their optimism enables them to stand up, brush themselves off, and move on to the next idea. It isn't that they don't learn, it's that their energies are concentrated in their belief that they can always recover. While this can be viewed as flaky, an advantage to having an I on your team is their ability to adapt. I's help guide their teams to go where the social current takes them, usually putting them at the forefront of trends and sales. When they curb their chattiness, the I's warmth and energy can shine through in wonderfully infectious ways. To sum up, I's are a gregarious, charming, and energetic group whose relationships are a boon to any organization. Their genuine affection for people and sense of humor offer a boost of good energy to those around them. For excellent communication, sales, and a shot of fresh enthusiasm, you want an I on your team. We have a few minutes left, and Clint, I wanted to ask, what advice can you offer those who have chatty but charming influencers in their lives? How do you personally approach working with them and maybe corralling them a little bit?
That's the operative word, corralling, right? Good luck. You know, I love working with I's and that their optimism, as you call it, they're spontaneous, fun, very energetic, so energized by people, and just always have that sort of bright outlook on life, and just very relationship driven. I think a couple things for me that are important. Number one is just helping them understand what makes them who they are and why it's a strength. But you can also know, as you very well educate them on their strength, your greatest strength can be your greatest weakness.
Yes.
And how do you amplify and enhance certainly the strength and mitigate the weakness. Now, they may not be able to do it themselves. So sometimes, well, first of all, just being aware, if they can be aware of the things, the weaknesses or some of the traits that can hurt them, whatever role they're in, say it's a sales role, what are some of the things that or the pitfalls or areas they need to be aware of as an I in the sales process that can trip them up. Sometimes that could be, well, you're so enthusiastic about this relationship that you get and love the conversation. You're talking so much that you're not quite listening like you should, or you miss some important details that were key to that solution or the problem the client wanted to solve, the prospect wanted to solve. Or another potential area I've noticed with eyes, and as example in a sales role, is just attention to detail. And they're so excited about prospect, but then they're moving on to the next project. But sometimes it requires a lot of patience and perseverance. They may be working with somebody that's an S or a C on the disc profile that just requires a lot more time and a lot more data and information. And eyes can grow very impatient, and they're ready to move on, where they left an opportunity on the table because they just didn't exercise that patience. So it may be that either they need to ratchet it back and put in sort of systems or develop habits or ways that they can sort of modulate that eye and be persistent and patient, or work with somebody, have a partner that complements them, that brings some of the S and C characteristics and behavioral styles into the relationship and can help balance that eye and help make up for fill in the gaps where those eye tendencies tend to trip them up.
That is great advice. And I see exactly the same challenges for my high I clients. And I think your observation about being a little more patient, and acknowledging that tapping the brakes and slowing down a little bit, and not like destroying your eagerness and your enthusiasm, because that's part of what makes an eye tick, but you have to be able to regulate it in a way where you're just not blowing the hair back.
Right, exactly.
Sitting across from you.
Well, the other thing is is that optimism, which is a great trait. How do you balance the realism side of this?
Yeah.
And just being able to have some tough questions to ask that really give us a realistic sense of, an objective sense. Where are we? Whether that's in a sales cycle or in some other kind of relationship or other, in personnel kind of thing you're working on, a personnel thing you're working on in the business or whatever operational thing. Ultimately, being able to ask them or have them ask themselves the tough questions that can give them a more kind of slow them down a little bit and give them a more objective viewpoint, a more realistic viewpoint, kind of temper them a little bit, I think is also healthy.
That is great advice. Thank you, Clint. And we are going to end on that wise note. This brings us to the end of today's episode. If you have a question for our Dear Coach segment, or if you'd like to schedule a DISC meeting to discover what your behavioral style means to your business, please email me at stephanie@therisingeffect.com. I also invite you to follow the show on my website at therisingeffect.com, which includes show notes and all my Dear Coach tips. My thanks again to today's guest, Clint Parry with Focus HR, to my producer, Mark Bishop, and to you for joining us on Small Biz, Big Voices. Stay safe and be well.